The field of plastic human engineering has one of the most interesting and useful products. Plastics are cheap, lightweight, and durable. Therefore, in almost every engineering field, from buildings and bridges to cars, sports equipment, computers, and phones, plastics are a unique choice. The production logic is quite fascinating. Similar to proteins that power our cells, plastics are produced by the coming together of small building blocks called monomers, which are akin to amino acids, forming a chain. Similarly, DNA, a natural polymer, is formed by the chaining of monomers called deoxyribonucleic acid. Therefore, plastics are sometimes referred to as polymers. Plastic is the name we give to human-made polymers. For example, DNA is a natural polymer, but PVC water pipes are a synthetic polymer. The synthesis of plastics and the characteristics they can acquire form a deep scientific field. However, when we place the harms of plastics on the other side of the scale, the balance is disrupted. Getting rid of plastics is extremely difficult because they consist of tightly interconnected chains. There are very few mechanisms in nature that can break them down. For instance, some bacteria, fungi, and worms can break down plastics, but these organisms are a minority, and the process is very slow. Therefore, a plastic water bottle thrown into nature can persist for 450 years. In other words, if that bottle had been plastic throughout its entire existence, and you squeezed the juice of an apple that fell from a tree into a plastic bottle in 1021, then threw the bottle into the garden, it would only just start to decompose now. Since plastic straws take 200 years to decompose, we see them stuck in the noses of turtles. The remnants of the toothbrush we use today could still be detected in 2521. We produce and consume so much plastic that every part of the world is currently covered in it. For example, in the Pacific Ocean, there are islands larger than 3 times the size of Turkey, mostly composed of plastic waste, spreading over 1.6 million square kilometers. These islands cover the surface and degrade the quality of the ocean. Plastic waste is even found in the Mariana Trench, 12,000 meters, or 12 kilometers, below the surface. Moreover, countries like Japan, Germany, the United States, France, and Italy send their plastic waste to poorer countries such as Vietnam, Malaysia, Laos, Turkey, and India, causing environmental damage for the sake of profit. These countries destroy their nature to make a profit, and, even worse, plastics do not easily break down. The broken pieces do not disappear immediately, they first break into small fragments. Then they break down into even smaller pieces, and the process continues. At some point, microplastics, tiny plastic particles, are formed, and they easily mix into the air or water, circulating more readily. Unfortunately, in a study conducted this year, it was revealed that microplastics were detected not only in the placenta formed during birth but also in the bodies of our babies through that placenta. Additionally, plastics themselves are partly unhealthy. Plastics start to release chemicals into food and drinks, as well as their surroundings, when they are scratched, exposed to high temperature variations, or left for long periods. Substances like diethylhexyl phthalate or bisphenol A found in some plastics can be harmful and even carcinogenic for humans and other animals. Chemicals like phthalates and BPA act like hormones, disrupting your hormonal balance. For example, they were commonly used in baby bottles, but their use has decreased. You might ask why we use them. Here, a big lie comes into play. The most important detail you need to know about plastics
Eğer ne yapacak olursanız ne tür özellikler elde edebileceğiniz gibi konular aslında oldukça derin bir bilim sahası.
So, no matter how much concern there is about environmentalism, the common suspect appears again. We use about 4% of the world's extracted petroleum for plastic production, and plastics, first produced in 1869, quickly became the main building block for kitchen utensils, food packaging, industrial sectors such as cars, textile products, and many other products because they are extremely cheap, easy to produce, and can be easily molded. The understanding and widespread production of their value during World War II had a significant impact on this rapid transformation. Many products previously made from materials like metals and non-metals were produced much more cheaply and quickly through plastics. Also, the American government, for the sake of patriotism during the war, forced all plastic companies to work together, creating a kind of monopoly unintentionally. Enriched during World War II, petroleum companies paid large amounts of money after the war to market plastics, which were unfamiliar to the public at the time. For example, what is now known as the Plastic Industry Association, previously called the Society of the Plastics Industry, represented all petroleum companies, all chemical companies, and all companies in the supply chain from auxiliary industry producers to consumers. This union, spending millions of dollars each year, learned about plastic consumption and gradually accustomed the public to it through advertisements, making them repeatedly use this cheap yet durable product. The union claimed that even reusable plastics were disposable and promoted the advantage of repurchasing, emphasizing the need to buy a new one at a low cost once consumed. As we will see shortly, there is some truth to this in certain cases, but in many instances, it was just a marketing ploy reinforcing plastic consumption. For instance, they claimed that baby bottles should be used once and then discarded, which is not valid for today's plastic bottles. Did these companies not know the environmental harms of plastics? Of course, they did, but they didn't care. The established system prioritized maximizing profits for the company and shareholders, not pleasing the environment. There was not enough incentive to care about the environment, and they didn't care either. However, in the 1960s and 70s, environmental movements saw how much of a threat plastic posed to the environment and quickly organized large protests. Activists targeting plastic and petroleum companies managed to create a certain awareness against plastics in society. For example, 20 million people participated in the Earth Day protest in the United States in 1970, which means 1 in every 10 Americans. The big lie emerged as a result of this public pressure. Instead of adjusting themselves and being disturbed by these protests and trends, plastic companies started marketing a new lie. Because making advertisements with lies costs a few $1 million, but making plastic technology environmentally friendly would likely cost billions. The lie they told was that plastics were recyclable, and this lie largely worked. People started collecting plastics en masse and throwing them into recycling bins. Recycling laws for plastics were enacted in many countries and cities. However, the plastic industry managed this process with very cunning moves. For example, in 1988, they passed a law in 40 states in the United States that made it mandatory to print a recycling symbol with a number in the middle on all produced plastics. But this was purely a number for deception. They took the famous recycling symbol produced without copyright by the recycling symbol in the 1970s, which means you can use it as you wish, and added a number to the middle. Thus, they created the perception that all plastics are recyclable because they all have the same 3-arrow symbol. In a short time, people began to believe in this lie and started thinking that the number inside those arrows indicated how many times the plastic could be used and how easily it could be recycled. However, it is not related at all. That number is called a resin identification code, indicating the material from which the plastic is produced. For example, a number corresponds to polyethylene terephthalate, known shortly as PET. This is where the term PET bottle comes from. You should not use PET bottles more than once because they easily leak plastic. 2 numbers indicate high-density polyethylene, or HDPE. We usually see this in butter dishes, detergent bottles, shampoo bottles, and milk containers. It can also be used to store heavier items than PET bottles. 3 numbers indicate polyvinyl chloride, or PVC. You can see this especially in fast food containers and plastic pipes. 4 numbers indicate low-density polyethylene, or LDPE. This is commonly found in plastic wraps for effective foods and plastic bags in supermarkets. 5 numbers indicate polypropylene, or PP. It is used especially in yogurt containers, baby diapers, and bottles, and you can also see this polymer in harder bottles. 6 numbers belong to polystyrene. It is used in products known as styrofoam or artificial foam and placed in boxes that contain fragile items for protection. It is also commonly used in thermal insulation. Finally, 7 numbers are used for other general plastics such as bisphenol A and polycarbonates. They are often marked with this number. But these numbers are of no significance. What matters is that when you see that sign, you believe it is recyclable and think that you are environmentally friendly when you throw them into blue recycling bins. I'm not saying this, by the way. This is what Veli Thomas, president of the Plastic Industry Association, says: if you think recycling works, then they won't bother you about the environment. Here is the English translation of the provided text. Do you see how they deceive us? These giant corporations all tell the same lie about the climate and environmental crisis. You are responsible, you are guilty, you can solve this. However, recycling, for example, is largely an illusion. When you throw things there, only about 8.9% of plastics can be recycled. Because almost none of the plastics are truly recyclable. Only some types, like PET and HDPE, numbers 1 and 2 plastics, can be recycled, and even they can only be recycled once or twice at most. Beyond that, they lose their resistance and integrity. They are not like metals or glass. You can recycle aluminum or steel and glass indefinitely, melting and reusing them. But plastics can be recycled at most once, maybe twice if you're lucky. That's as far as it goes. If companies choose to spend money on properly sorting, recycling, and reusing the waste you randomly throw, because many of them never prefer this, they are just creating an illusion, making it seem like they are doing something. In documents published by the plastic industry, you see that the plastics collected for recycling have no meaningful use, and it's probably more profitable to produce from scratch instead of recycling. But just believe that plastics are recyclable. Moreover, this is not the first time. For example, in a report produced by the oil giant Exxon in 1982 and another report published later in 1998 by Shell, they wrote that if we continue to extract and burn oil, emitting carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, we would increase the planet's average temperature by 1.1 degrees since the Industrial Revolution, and by 2080, a temperature increase of around 3 degrees is very likely, with highly destructive consequences, stating the importance of transitioning to alternative energy strategies, mentioning that people could turn away from them, and their companies could be harmed. What happened? We came to the year 2020 to 2021. According to the IPCC report published this year, as of 2021, the average temperature has indeed increased by 1.1 degrees, just as they predicted in the 1980s. By 2080, a temperature increase of 2.5 to 3 degrees is very likely. Both sources come to the same conclusion. Now think about the seriousness of the climate crisis. But they didn't care about any of this. Still, they continued production at full speed, even accelerating. They continued to obstruct technologies that would lead us away from oil and natural gas. They multiplied their money by selling your children's future, and they are still doing it. Don't be fooled by environmentally friendly green marketing efforts. For example, in the United States, they passed laws before there was even a significant plastic problem, banning the banning of plastics in the future. Yes, you heard it right, they passed a ban on banning. Look, this is the only way to defeat them. Be aware of their games and prepare accordingly, get organized. Recycling 89% of plastics is certainly better than zero. So, you can make an effort for that, but please know that if the plastic you throw is dirty, for example, if it has pizza stains or is mixed with other plastics, it will never be recycled. There are strange rules about this. Usually, they are either burned and released into the atmosphere or dumped into the oceans. Both are disastrous. So, to be environmentally friendly, don't just focus on recycling calculations but rather focus more on the reusability of the products you use and reduce your plastic consumption. For example, switch to glass, steel, or ceramic. Try to use the bags you already have and avoid buying new ones. When offered paper instead of plastic, don't overlook this dual option. Both are polymers, and both can be recycled very little. In theory, paper can be recycled 6 to 7 times, but there is a significant loss of quality each time. And often, paper is recycled and generates even more solid waste than plastic. Plastic bags and paper bags marketed as reusable also cause serious environmental damage during production. So, change your perspective entirely, get reusable bags that you can use hundreds of times and take them with you when you go shopping. Especially try to avoid PVC, number 3, and polystyrene, number 6 plastics. If number 7 plastics don't have BPA written on them or don't have a recycling symbol, know that there is probably BPA in them and try to avoid them. Instead of buying a few products in many shopping trips, try to accumulate and buy more products at once if possible. This way, you can reduce bag consumption to some extent. If you must use plastic, choose PET or HDPE, that is, number 1 and 2 plastics. Try to reuse number 2 plastics repeatedly, don't throw them away immediately after one use. If possible, completely eliminate plastic. But also understand that you cannot solve the environmental crisis with things you do alone, it is just a distraction game. Never forget this, those who create the problem are the giant corporations and the states that channel them. So, our job is to apply the right pressures on them, bring the right people into management. For example, support environmental activists. Stop seeing them as poor hiccups. Instead, realize that they are warriors trying to secure the future and support them financially and spiritually. Participate in political processes and don't let fancy stories from giving companies blind local and national politicians. Learn science not from the advertisements of giant companies but from science communicators and scientists. We are dealing with a greedy and destructive monster that can sell the planet for profit without shedding a tear. That's why I wanted you to understand what's going on. Plastics may be easy and convenient, but being easy and convenient doesn't guarantee worth using. See you in the next video, goodbye.